Welcome to The Other Side, Mississippi Today's political podcast. I'm your host, Adam Ganucheau. The Other Side lets you hear directly from the most connected players and observers across the spectrum of politics in Mississippi. From breaking news to political strategy to interviews with candidates and elected officials, we'll bring you facts, perspectives, and context that helps you cut through the noise and understand all sides of the story. I'm your host, Adam Ganucheau. Joining me today in the studio are my colleagues, Geoff Pender. Hey, Geoff, how's it going?
Hey, Adam.
And Bobby Harrison. Bobby, how you doing?
Hey, guys.
Good to be with y'all this morning. We have the two of y'all have been covering a pretty major story, political story, the last week or two here in Mississippi. I'd like to say in my 10 or so years here covering politics, it's on up there in terms of just sort of the drama and the intrigue and just sort of the tension happening here. But the gist of it, just to sum it up really quickly, is Attorney General Lynn Fitch, who has public aspirations for governor in 2027, running for governor in 2027, issued an official opinion that basically her argument is that State Auditor Shad White, who also has 2027 gubernatorial aspirations and someone who Lynn Fitch and Shad White have definitely sparred multiple times over the past few months, Lynn Fitch ruled that State Auditor Shad White overstepped his authority, his legal authority, in a recent study that he and his office commissioned. He paid about $2 million to an out-of-state consulting group to study spending across the state of Mississippi, just public spending, and he found that hundreds of millions of dollars in waste and fat could be trimmed. And the study the consultants put together recommended a lot of those changes to the legislature. So, as y'all have covered for the past few weeks after that study was released, there has been some consternation among legislative leaders in particular who have sort of questioned what Shad White's intentions are with that. And it kind of came out of the blue. Shad White, of course, who is not shy from cameras. He has sort of gone on a media circuit boosting this study and talking all about how he found all these spending discrepancies or, what he would consider wasteful spending line items on certain things. And it's just gotten a lot of buzz over the past few weeks, really at Shad White's urging. So, it was notable, obviously, that a sitting state AG would opine that she believed that the auditor overstepped his authority. The basis for her opinion is that by her interpretation of state law, the auditor first needed authorization to conduct a managerial study like this, and he needed that authorization from either the legislature themselves or the governor. And it appears that the auditor did not have either of those things. In response to this opinion, State Auditor Shad White maintains that he did have the legal authority to conduct this study, and in a statement that he sent out to all the press in response to this opinion, he said that he believed, or he thought that it was possible that Attorney General Lynn Fitch and Lieutenant Governor Delbert Hosemann, who of course is president of the Senate, sort of came together and are trying to, make him look bad, because that same study that has been called into question now found that Hosemann and Fitch rode on the state airplane to an out-of-state baseball game. So I tried to be as succinct as possible to explain all this. It is a crazy story. If you haven't read it, you may want to pause this episode right now and just go read it, because there are a lot of layers to it. Geoff, Bobby, any main takeaways before we get to our guest interview today?
No, I think you covered it.
Other than it maybe should be pointed out, the AG's opinion was because one was requested by the Senate Vice Chairman of Appropriations, who oversees the auditor's budget. He said they were surprised by him spending $2 million that never came up when they were setting his budget.
That is a big takeaway, because of course we are about to enter the 2025 legislative session starting January 7th. Every agency has to go request a budget, and of course, the auditor's budget is a big one. It's an important one that we've got like you said, Jeff, the man in the Senate who oversees the budget process for the auditor's office. In the story that I mentioned, that y'all really need to go read if you haven't, is on the record saying, I am concerned that the state auditor broke the law here. And he talked about how many of the findings in the auditor's report have been sort of pointed out and rehashed over many, many, many years, and there wasn't really anything new that the auditor found. It's really interesting comments from the guy, again, who's about to have a huge hand in setting the auditor's budget for the next fiscal year. And of course, broader political implications with that 2027 governor's race. We've got the three principals here being State Auditor Shad White, Attorney General Lynn Fitch, and Lieutenant Governor Delbert Hosemann. All three have publicly said that they are considering running for governor in 2027. So, Bobby and Jeff, we did an interview with Steve Patterson, who served as state auditor from 1992 to 1996. It was a great interview because of really an almost identical initiative he led when he was state auditor that had some, I really believe, direct bearing on the situation that we're covering today with Shad White and Lynn Fitch. I'd like to, for this episode, play that interview that we did a little while ago for our listeners. But one thing I want to say before we do, I suspect there will be some listeners who may be inclined to take issue with our decision to do this because of Steve Patterson's legal troubles in history. For Mississippi politicos who have been around for a while, Bobby, Jeff, like y'all, I mean, you'll recall that Patterson resigned 1 year into his second term as state auditor in the 90s as part of a plea deal following a corruption investigation. He ended up pleading guilty to a misdemeanor charge of filing a false affidavit to keep from paying county taxes through the purchase of a license plate. And then there was a separate legal situation years later in which Patterson was caught up in a federal judicial bribery scandal. He, in that case, also pleaded guilty and served time in prison. You can read, anybody listening can go read just extensive coverage of both those situations, including from my colleagues Bobby and Jeff here today, if you're unfamiliar. But again, given Patterson's time as state auditor and his expertise in really this exact same situation that we're covering today, as we know, history has a tendency to repeat itself in Mississippi, and this certainly qualifies as one of those moments. For all those reasons, I thought that this interview with Steve Patterson was very notable and worth sharing with y'all today. So, I know that you all know this. If you have issues with this, you know how to reach me via email or on Twitter or whatever. But, I hope you'll enjoy this interview nonetheless. So here it is. You, of course, during that term plus of being state auditor, had a really directly applicable situation to the one that we're covering in Mississippi today.
Correct.
With what we just kind of walked through with Lynn Fitch and Shad White. Tell us a little bit about sort of your experience with a similar study that you and your office conducted during your time as state auditor, and tell us a little bit about how you went about getting there.
Well, first of all, when I was first elected, my very first official act was to create a Department of Performance Audit housed within the state auditor's office. The view being that the state auditor generally and historically had provided two kinds of audits: compliance audits, which is you make sure that you have spent the money in compliance with the law, and then a financial audit that simply says the books are in order, 2 + 2 = 4. Well, those are both very good tools, but they don't really tell the whole story. If we're spending taxpayers' money, as we do in the auditor's office and every other agency of both state, county, and city government, which, by the way, the state auditor has purview over counties and cities as well. It is really the only constitutional office that interfaces annually and is required annually to interface with every other agency of government, is the state auditor's office. So it's a very powerful position in this state. When I created the Performance Audit Division, the idea was that we can do all of these audits that we have historically done, and that is the financial and compliance audit. And those are good tools, but they're not the best tools, because if we're doing that, we should also be able to test and measure results. In other words, if we're spending money on a project, whatever it is, to address whatever need, were we successful? Did the expenditure of money net us results? And those results can be tested, and they can be measured. And so I created this performance audit division, and immediately I set out a private task force that I appointed, and Bill Cole, who was the former state treasurer of Mississippi, chaired one, and Cecil Brown chaired the other. I set up a task force to look at the way we manage the assets of the state. And the other one was, if there was a privatization task force, are we doing things in state government that the private sector does and does better and does cheaper? And if so, we ought not be doing it as a government program. And we issued a book called Stop the Waste. Well, Stop the Waste was funded by, we set up a foundation, and it was all funded by private contributions, private donations. And we, printed that book, Stop the Waste. Well, then I got really interested in performance auditing of state government. In the Hugh White administration, back in the 30s or 40s, Governor White and the legislature had a report done, not through the auditor's office, but had a report done by the Brookings Institution. And that was the last serious look that had been done back in the 30s of government reform, of what can we do better, more efficiently, and more effectively. And so that Brookings Institution report became sort of a model, a historical model. And I then went to the legislature and said, I want to do a performance audit of state government. Well, the story from that point is I did it as a separate appropriation and a separate authorization from the state auditor's budget. So it was not done just thrown into my budget, but it was a standalone bill that instructed me. Of course, I wrote the bill, but it instructed me as to what to do and how to spend the money.
Yeah, I think you asked for $500,000, didn't you?
I specifically asked for $500,000, which was not included in my budget. And that is the question that I have now: is where'd the $2 million come from? I mean, if he's got $2 million laying around to do an unauthorized performance review, or I don't know what he's calling it. Is it? Y'all referred to it as a management study, which would be pretty much the same thing.
The money came from special funds that have been building up in his budget, which might raise some questions too. But
I would think it would, because at that point, one of my primary criticisms, if y'all look back at the historical record on it, was the way we budget money, which has led to this. Is what happens through our budget system is every agency goes back to the budget commission, and they generally give you what you had last year, give you maybe a little incremental increase, and you're off to the races for the next fiscal year. And no questions are ever asked of what are we getting for that money? What has that money done? What problems are we designed to address, and have we measured the results? And that was my whole point of the thing. It was really a criticism of the budget process. So nonetheless, I get the legislature to agree, and Bobby, I think you would probably remember this. It was not easy. It was a hard fought sort of battle. At one point, I even told the legislature, I said, give me 500 and I'll give you 5 million back. And if I don't do that, I will resign my office. I was that confident of being able to find workable, real dollars that could be found through this process of performance auditing. And so they did give me the money. I then went through a bid process and ended up sending out solicitations from all of the, I don't know what it was at the time, big 6, big 7 accounting firms that also had government auditing capabilities and consulting arms. They all responded. I ended up choosing Pete Marwick. I wanted an independent, verifiable, measured results that Pete Marwick, one of the big 6 accounting firms, would stand behind. And so we on my staff through the performance audit division that I had created, along with Pete Marwick, issued, I think it was like 39 recommendations. I think when we first did it, there were probably 40 something, and I would send those recommendations either to the agencies that were impacted for comment, and the bottom line is, there's like 39 recommendations. Some of the recommendations, as we went through the process, did not make it into the final report for whatever reasons.
What were some of the big recommendations or spending your report identified?
Well, it was everything. There were, I guess, one of the big things was Medicaid expansion, which has been a hot issue here for years. We were able to see what the economic impact of that would be, and it's incredibly positive. You've got a more skilled, you've got a more healthy workforce. You don't have to spend money in so many other areas. That was one of the things. But some of it was just minor stuff. For instance, I'll give you one that always stood out for me. At that time, the Highway Patrol, the Mississippi Highway Patrol, in their driver's license division, we were using trained officers that we had put through the academy, uniformed officers, to do driver's license and renewals. Well, to me, and what we recommended is that's a waste of talent. We don't need somebody that has been through the academy. It's a clerical job primarily. And so, the recommendation was that you didn't have to have somebody that trained in those areas doing driver's license, that you could take a clerical person and do that. And that was one of the issues at the time. The other thing that we were trying to get at was, and I'll give you a great example. Let's say we're spending money to address the ever occurring need of infant mortality. We've led the nation in those numbers for all my life, and we spend a lot of money, and we've got a lot of projects through the Department of Health to address and to try to improve those infant mortality rates. Well, if we're spending that money and we're not getting the results, why? What's working and what's not? And so we took a look at that. And what we learned is that we had adequate programs in place to impact in a positive way infant mortality rates, but the public didn't know about those programs. So it was more of an educational thing. And the following year, we took money and we placed it on advertising and educational outreach to reach the people that needed it, and the rates incrementally went down, so it was somewhat successful. But it was just a myriad of things like that. We then sent a book, the study itself, with all the data and all the crosstabs, to every member of the legislature, all of the executive heads of the bigger departments, as well as some of the counties. And then we wrote a summary called Choices. And you can get that, I think, Bobby, that's probably in the library at the Capitol the press capital, but you can get that and go through each of the recommendations. And then I went out and simply recruited somebody to sponsor bills on each one of the recommendations. The ones that required legislation. Some did not require legislation, but everything that required legislation, I did. I got bills introduced, some of which made it through committee, some which didn't. And even now, 30 years later, I get calls occasionally saying, "You made a recommendation for so and so, and this bill's coming up. Talk to me about it." And I obviously do.
Mr. Patterson, talk to us a little bit about the politics of this. I mean, I imagine that up and coming.
We had a
state
very
auditor.
similar circuit. We had a very similar circuit.
Yeah.
It was expected that I would run for governor. Eddie Briggs was the lieutenant governor. Kurt Fordyce was the governor. The governor supported my legislation.
Republican governor. You were a Democrat, and he was a Republican governor who kind of campaigned on reducing waste or whatnot.
That's right. Matter of fact, when I got the bill passed, we had a public signing at the governor's mansion and a joint press conference with the governor on the day that the bill passed. And then Eddie Briggs was the lieutenant governor. They were at odds, and Eddie was hearing footsteps from me and everybody else thinking that I was going to run for governor. And so he never actually stated public opposition, but I had a real problem in the Senate because he didn't want the bill to pass.
But you were able to
we ran over him. Yeah. So we set out to run over him and did. And the bill passed with pretty significant margins in both houses.
I may be asking you something you say you can't answer, but well, let me ask it this way. You can't answer this. It would have been easier for you to have just, if you had access to the money, to have just initiate this study without going through the legislature, but you felt that you didn't have the authority to do so without legislative approval, even if you had had the money.
Correct, and I was criticizing others for doing the same thing at the time. So that's absolutely right. I did not feel like I had either the authority to do the study or certainly didn't have the appropriation to fund it.
Mr. Patterson, I don't know how much of this current Project Momentum report you've looked at. It's not that lengthy of a report. One, I guess, complaint we've heard from some others, Senator Polk requested the AG's opinion in part because there was some concern that it didn't look like a very in-depth or it didn't look like $2 million worth of report. Contained a lot of stuff that would date back to probably that Brookings Institute study you mentioned, stuff that's been brought up time and time again. But have you looked at any of these recommendations? What's your thoughts on them?
I have not looked at them. I will tell you as a comparison, I spent $500,000 and got $600 million annual dollars back in recommendations. He spent $2 million and got what was the
330 something million?
Yeah, he spent 4 times as much as I did and got half the results.
And it should be said that Eddie Briggs was afraid you were going to run against him for governor, and you probably would have if you didn't have those car tag issues, and a lot of people felt you would have been one of the favorites for governor when you did run.
Yeah, at the time, I think that was, and I think I probably would have, and I probably would have done fairly well.
Well, Mr. Patterson, this has been really enlightening. I thought that your experience was directly applicable, like I said, to what we're dealing with here, and I've learned a lot about this, and now I think we have a lot more context. But thank you for being here and sharing your story.
I'm always glad to talk about that because that performance audit study that we did is really a nice piece of work, and it should be. When I left office, I told Phil Bryant, who succeeded me, I said, this is the most important thing this office has ever done. And you need to follow up on it. Yeah. And he did not. And you get into those things of whose baby is it, And I think a lot of it was because it was mine and my creation, that a lot of it just got stuck in a shelf at the Capitol and it was never moved on. But they're good recommendations. They're based on solid research, and it needs to be done. As far as what Shad's doing now, it needs to be done periodically. So I have no qualms about what he has done. I don't know the methodology of how he did it, but I personally don't know how he did it without a special appropriation.
Yeah. Well, we will continue covering all the speculation about that and the debate over that exact thing. So, but Mr. Patterson, really appreciate your time, and thanks for joining us here for a few minutes this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
As we cover the biggest political stories in the state, you don't want to miss an episode of The Other Side. We'll bring you more reporting from every corner of the state, sharing the voices of Mississippians and how they are impacted by the news. So what do we need from you, the listener? We need your feedback and support. Subscribe to our weekly podcast on your favorite podcast app or stream episodes online at mississippi.org/The Other Side. For the Mississippi Today team, I'm Adam Ganucheau. The Other Side is produced by Mississippi Today and engineered by Blue Sky Studios. We hope you'll join us for our next episode.